Yes, hello everyone. Warm welcome to the 6th European Conference on Behavior and Energy Efficiency, Behave. We will be commencing the session 2B now. This session's theme is Behavioral Insights for Energy Use, Energy Efficiency, End-Use Energy Efficiency in the Buildings. I am Rahul Dusa, working as a senior expert at in energy efficiency at UNEP DTU Partnership. I will be moderating this session now. There will be about 6 presentations in this session. The speakers and their presentation topics are displayed here. So before proceeding, we would be having some basic housekeeping rules. I understand everyone is aware of this, but let's revise. Each presentation is given 10 minutes time. I'm sure you're aware of this. Speakers, please do note this point. We should ensure that the last speaker also gets a fair opportunity to present their views. So yes, try to stick to the point, time. In the end, there is 30-minute question and Q&A session where the audience can will get the opportunity to ask their questions. So, but it does not mean that the audience have to wait till the end. The audience can use the chat option in the Zoom application to post their questions. I would request the audience to post the questions to the moderator and do mention the speaker's name to whom the question is being targeted to. Regarding the audio part, yes, speakers, please mute yourselves. Do unmute when you have your turn to speak. Audience, I think by default, they are muted once they join the conference. Camera, again, yes, if the speaker wishes to turn on the camera, they can, provided it is their turn during the presentation. And yes, speakers, you have just experimented now. You have the share screen option. So when it is your turn, you can share your screen and start presenting your topic. So with this, I'll call in the first speaker for the session, Annika. Annika will be presenting the topic on pragmatic segmentation approach to change every energy behavior in residential buildings. A brief intro for Annika. She's a senior researcher at the Sustainability Research Group, University of Basel, Switzerland. She has an interdisciplinary academic background with a diploma in environmental sciences and holds a doctoral degree in political science. Her research focus is mostly on international and national, as well as intra-disciplinary projects and publications. It is mostly on the governance of energy or sustainability transformations, includes mobility, food sharing and sufficiency, particularly on change of behavior, social innovations, energy, climate policies, and justice. Annika, you may share your screen now and start your presentation. You have minutes. I'll start the countdown once you start the presentation. It's okay.
Yeah, thank you. So thank you very much for the introduction. I will present. I will present a paper that we are writing in a team together with my colleague Eliana Schubert, Judith de Groot, Verena Kempfen, and Paul Burger. And I'm from the Sustainability Research Group. This paper has its background in the Horizon 2020 project Utility, where we tested human-centric behavioral interventions and ICT tools to reduce energy consumption in 5 countries. So the background of this paper and of the idea is that interventions to change particularly highly routinized energy consumption behavior often is very challenging, and regarding the big ambitious goals we have to reduce energy consumption, literature points out that it's not enough and we still need to do more. So one size does not fit all is one approach or one idea. so that interventions maybe need to be more targeted towards what we want to change. So we defined rationales, or we gathered rationales for tailoring interventions from literature. So first of all, people are heterogeneous, means people are different. If you want to convince a young woman, for example, with a family to change energy consumption behavior, you might need different instruments and might need different languages or designs of the instruments than if you, for example, want to convince a retired person. So interventions need to be tailored to the different consumer segments. Second, people show different types of consumption behaviors. So there's a diversity not only from habits versus one-shot choices when I buy a device, but also regarding the fields, heating, electricity, and so on. So this needs to be taken into account when I design instruments. Third is people respond differently to behavioral factors and trigger points. So we have psychological factors, we have structural context factors, and they stimulate the behavior, and they themselves can be stimulated through tailored interventions. Then behavior change is not continuous approach or not a linear development, but there are phases defined in literature and different models. So interventions that take these phases into account might have a bigger effect or have a bigger effect than temporarily cross-cutting ones. And last but not least, people respond differently to different types of interventions and combinations. So we have feedback, information, nudging, all instruments that are very well researched. But how to design those tailored interventions and even combine them in consistent policy mixes is still a question. So our approach is to develop a pragmatic approach to systematically set up tailored intervention strategies. Pragmatic because we work together with business partners and pilot sites in the 5 countries, and we had to zoom down our more high-level scientific framework to real-world context. Research question is then how can different types and packages of instruments be tailored to different groups of people, different types of consumption behavior, driven trigger points and behavioral phases. So we developed a framework based on literature and 2 other frameworks, and that we, as I said, implemented or translated to a real-world application in terms of a recommendation engine. This framework and engine we discussed or the approach we discussed in living labs, and then it was tested in pilot sites in 5 countries. We haven't the final data yet, unfortunately, but we are about to see if the data confirms our approach. So I will go through the framework quickly. First of all, tailoring towards consumers, to segments or groups of consumers, to be group specific. There are several segmentation approaches that could be applied. We chose that one along the core values: egoistic, hedonistic, altruistic, and biospheric, for several reasons. And then we distilled that into again the pragmatic approach into 3 groups: self-focused, environmentally concerned, and socially concerned people. They were segmented based on a questionnaire in the beginning, and then we tried to tailor, for example, our recommendations or instruments accordingly to these groups. Second, type specific. So we were talking about energy services, not about kilowatt hour consumption in the project. We also took account more the habitual behaviors, in the fields of electricity and heating. So we tailored that accordingly. Our interventions, say recommendations for cooking, for HVAC, but also for overall consumption. Then to the trigger points, to kind of take account the multifactorial, multifactorial that are around. This is a graph from Burger et al. Paper from another framework. So this is kind of the universe of factors that influence our behavior. And we took that as a starting point and said, well, these are possible trigger factors that are important in our project. So we try to define interventions accordingly. So, for example, for the weather, we said we had a weather pack, we called. So if it's a very cold phase, people got recommendations how to deal with the heating to save some energy. With emotions, we worked with pictures, and with biases, for example, we used remote control functions. So for the people who didn't want to be bothered with actively reducing energy, they had the possibility that it was automatically done in the project. The phases, there are several models for example, in health research, but also in energy-related research on these behavioral change phases. So to take into account this dynamic phenomenon of change, we said we want not 4 or 5 phases, but again, to have it more easier, we wanted to have 3 phases, so unfreeze, change, and refreeze. That is more from organizational research. So in the first step, it's important to induce change by interventions, to engage with them. In the second, interventions to change the behavior, and in the third phase, to provide continuity and deliver according messages. So this is then how the whole framework looks like. So the integrated framework, I will not go through all of it, but you can see the 3 phases. You can see here the tailoring to segments and types of behaviors and trigger points. And then you can see that we had certain interventions defined for the unfreeze and the refreeze step. So continued feedback in the end, and in the beginning, getting people engaged by this questionnaire and first information. And then in the change step, we had these kind of interventions. So tailored recommendations, then weekly feedback notifications for the people, tailored as well. And then we had information, the interface, where people could actively get information about price, CO2, kilowatt hours. And we also had this kind of nudging, automation and remote control with the opting out option. This was then transferred to a recommendation engine. So we had an Excel file in the beginning, and the IT persons put that into the devices. Again, I will not go through all the stuff, but this is kind of the elements and the dimensions that we developed. And here you can see we had like recommendations for different segments and so on, and for different interventions. So coming to the conclusion, it proved to be a sound foundation. So it worked for tailored intervention strategies, as far as we can tell at that moment, as we are still analyzing. But the first data, especially from the living labs, prove that it's a valid foundation. But however, we say, well, tailoring is limited by and has to be adapted to real world context. So we had, for example, our business partners they have their business models and interventions to reduce energy consumption they have to fit into their business models. Also different technological conditions. So do they have a HVAC? What smart meters do the people have? Also cultural differences from different countries differently responding to interventions, and also language issues. And then it's challenging because it's time consuming and costly, for example, to select the segmentation model, to design the questionnaire, design the messages. So you need, I think, to keep this profitable tailoring strategy, kind of a shortcut handbook or information for business partners to have an easy way to include that or introduce that. Okay, so I guess that was more than 10 minutes, but I would be happy if you have some comments or questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Annika. It was indeed an interesting presentation, directing our thoughts to, from one size fits all approach versus having tailored interventions with respect to energy conservation behavior. So yes, so while we there was some introduction towards behavioral changes towards energy. We now move on to another topic focusing on historic buildings. We now have Giorgia, who will be presenting the topic on human-driven energy efficiency in historic buildings. A brief about Giorgia: she has obtained a doctorate from Polytechnic University of Turin and Karlsruhe Institute of Technology in 2020. That's recent, yeah. With a thesis entitled "Exploring Occupant Behavior Personalities for Historic Buildings," again, energy retrofits. So she is currently a postdoctoral research fellow at University of Turin again, where her main research activities involve indoor environmental quality, subjective and objective assessments. Welcome, Giorgia. The floor is yours. You have 10 minutes.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Giorgia Spigliantini. Today I'm going to talk to you about my PhD thesis, which was about human-driven energy efficiency in historic buildings. So before starting with my research, I tried to understand if the topic of historic buildings energy efficiency was worth of investigation, both from the energy research perspective and the preservation sector perspective. And I saw that in the energy sector research, in the last about 10 years, the number of publications on this topic grew very much. And maybe because of the replacement rate of existing buildings by new ones in Europe being so low, and also because in some countries, like Italy, for example, the weight of the historic buildings on the total building stock is very important. And so historic buildings have a crucial role to reach the European greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals. And also, most of these historic buildings are used today. They host human activities. So there is the necessity to adapt them to our current lifestyles and also the standards of health and comfort for occupants. Also looking at the preservation sector, so restoration and cultural heritage, there is the necessity to address energy efficiency in historic buildings. And here I'm showing you a research by the Ministry of Cultural Heritage in Italy, which shows that public museums, which are most in historic buildings in Italy, usually have the energy expenditure which represents more than 70% of the total annual balance. However, searching for a balance between preservation and adaptation of these buildings is not easy because the preservation sector usually promotes the protection of the building materiality for the transmission of the future generation of these buildings as much original as possible. And the adaptation sector, so energy efficiency, for example, we usually propose intervention on the building materiality, so insulating walls, substituting HVAC, etc., to enhance the energy performance of these buildings. And the result is that most often the energy standards exempt historic buildings from respecting these prescriptions, and the building stock of historic buildings is not retrofitted at all. So at the beginning of my study, I tried to, I suggest, let's say, that maybe occupant behavior and building operation in general could represent a valuable energy retrofit itself for this kind of buildings. So I create this theoretical framework to understand if occupant engagement and building operation could be an effective way of optimizing occupants' comfort, but also reducing the energy consumption of these buildings, and some heritage conservation risks related to artworks and decoration, which are often present in this kind of building stock, and increase also social responsibility towards this kind of heritage. So the research question was, what are the potentialities of energy savings and indoor environmental conditions enhancement by acting only on the way these non-residential buildings are operated by occupants and operators. And to this aim, I designed a methodology called Biosphere, which is articulated in 3 phases, subsequent, called diagnosis, interventions, and control, which is addressed at the same time to building occupants and building managers, operator, whatever. And it is intended to be applied both in cooling and heating season. So a complete, let's say, application of the methodology would require at least 18 months. And during my PhD, I did a first pilot study in 4 buildings, which lasted from 2017 to 2019. So now I'm going a little bit into the methodology. So the first phase, called diagnosis, is basically an assessment of the state of the building before the intervention. So it begins with the semi-structured interviews of the building managers in order to acquire relevant information about how the building is operated from an energy point of view, but also to acquire some data or about energy consumption, like from energy bills, in order to calculate some energy indicators. And the same is done also with environmental monitoring data. So basically, in my pilot study, I analyzed the temperature and relative humidity of these buildings. And at the same time, occupants are involved by submitting to them some questionnaires. And actually, the questionnaires were developed for different types of, let's say, of occupants, from office workers to classroom users, etc. And these first phase is concluded with the proposition of some intervention, which are agreed with the building administration, also by means of seasonal reports. The second phase of intervention is composed by some strategies addressed to the building managers, like the change of some HVAC set points or their schedules, or also the change of some elements management, like in museums, how the windows are operated, for example. And the objectives are to lower the energy consumption of the building, but also to respond to some occupants' comfort necessities which emerged from the questionnaire of the first phase, and to solve critical situations related to artworks conservation. And in relation to occupants, the aim is to educate them to take a proper advantage of their control opportunities, and also to engage them in lower the building energy consumption. And the measures were various. I'm not going deep now, but there were newsletters, but also signs positioned within the indoor spaces. So, for example, instruction on how to use the thermostat in a proper way and things like this. And the third phase is called control, and it is addressed to define the potential, let's say, of energy saving, but also of behavioral change and thermal comfort increase in these buildings. So basically, a lot of analyses that were already done in phase one are repeated now, while for occupants, a specific questionnaire is elaborated here to also assess behavioral change and the appreciation of the communication means that were used during the intervention. Here I'm showing you some of the strategies and also the energy impact on three case studies. As you can see, there was basically the potential of having some energy saving ranging from about 10% to with some peaks up until 40%. And as a general comment, I would say that the potential of energy saving, of course, is related to the let's call it a mismanagement, operational mismanagement of the building before the implementation of the methodology. But even when there was maybe an increase, a slight increase of energy consumption, it was possible in this case, for example, to intervene even in the middle of the season to fix some problems and re-establish a good situation for the occupants. Even considering the thermal sensation both and the thermal comfort, as you can see, actually the thermal sensation did not change very much between the intervention and the previous phase, even if the set points were changed quite remarkably in some cases. And even when the trend was not positive, it was possible to understand the reason why by simply asking to occupants or to the operator. So I think that it was extremely important to involve these two kind, let's say, of stakeholders in the whole implementation of the methodology. And also about thermal comfort, actually the decrease of energy consumption corresponded actually to, in most cases, to an increase of thermal comfort. So in conclusion, considering the whole implementation, the Behaviour methodology allowed energy savings ranging from 10 to 16%, with a seasonal peak of 36%. And I think that it's very important to notice that these kind of results are not very different from the energy savings that you can expect from the most used retrofit measures like insulation of the roof, and things like this that you can do in historic buildings. And this is not to say that that this methodology is better than retrofitting the building, but it's just to say that since this methodology is almost zero costly, it can be coupled with this kind of intervention, or when the building tenant, for example, does not have the economic possibility to implement other strategies, this could be also a way to save energy and also sometimes or even mostly ameliorating occupants' thermal comfort. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Giorgia, for the thought-provoking presentation. As you rightly indicated, we do see many historic buildings, and if someone does think of taking some actions or energy efficiency actions towards it, we still need that there is still scope of having a good stakeholder engagement and yes, optimization of these building operations with minimal material interventions is probably the first step to for approaching or having an ultimate aim of becoming energy efficient. So yes, now we move on to the next speaker, Simon, who will be presenting the next topic on apartment-related energy performance gaps and occupant behavior for two multi-apartment buildings. So yes, Simon, the floor is yours.
Okay, today, hello everyone. Today I want to present findings from a case study about differences between predicted heating energy demand and actual heating energy consumption in multi-apartment buildings, and possible explanations of occupant-building interaction, and discuss implications for energy efficiency measures. So the problem, you know it all, energy efficiency is an important pillar for climate change policy. And there has been considerable success to reduce consumption in new constructions, so in new buildings. But for the existing building stock, improvements lag behind, in part because building owners doubt savings effects. And this comes in part from the energy performance gaps. So that's the difference between predicted heating energy demand from a design stage, so basically performance calculations, and actual metered heating energy consumption. And there's different reasons for energy performance gap. One of which is occupant behavior, which I will focus on. And there is, or evidence is ambiguous whether people voluntarily increase energy consumption to increase comfort, which would be the classical rebound effect, or whether this is rather an effect of unintentional occupant building interactions. And I assume that the second one actually has a big role. And and we'll bring some evidence and implications. So for data and methods, to analyze this, we conducted a field study in 2 multi-apartment buildings with in total 88 apartments. They were built in 1960 and refurbished in the 1990s to moderate insulation levels, but very much below current standards. So if you would refurbish them today, you would have to put much more insulation on the buildings. And the building owners are very reluctant to do so. But they are urged to look for new energy efficiency measures and plan to implement a smart heating regulation system instead, which is part of this research project. And in this context, we also conducted a survey among 34 of the households, response rate of 45%. And I will discuss some results and implications. Since the sample is very small and there's a lot of influencing factors which are often codependent, I basically interpret these findings only qualitatively because I can't really do inductive statistics on this. But what we find basically, first of all, is there are differences in heating energy demand between different apartments. So we calculated the energy performance gaps for each single apartment, which is normally only done for the buildings, but we are interested in differences between apartments because that's where the households act basically, and there's differences between households as we have seen before. And we see that there is differences in heating demand. So, for example, apartments in the top floor need more energy, of course, so under the roof or above the basement. But energy consumption actually differs much more widely. And we see that on the right-hand side, that the energy performance gaps can differ widely and be more than 200% of actual heated energy demand. So what you would expect under standardized conditions. So there's different reasons for this. Obviously, indoor temperatures differ between households, but not only between households, but also within households. So we see on the left-hand side thermostat settings for the different households during day D and night N. And you see basically that people like it really warm in living rooms but not so much in bedrooms. So in bedrooms, they actually also expected to be cold, and they also operate their rooms very differently. So on the right-hand side, you see, for example, that in the kitchen, they almost never change their thermostat settings, and they basically leave it always almost off, whereas in the bathroom, they only turn it on if they require heat, and then they expect the room to get warm fast, sorry. And we see the same from temperatures, the same pattern. So we conducted one-time temperature measurements during the interviews, and see that there's a significant, and we also see that there is a significant correlation, obviously, between energy performance gap and temperatures. But, and this is the more interesting point to focus on here, is that there are apartments which are above 22 degrees warm on average, but which need actually less energy than would be predicted under standard conditions for heating of 20 degrees. So one reason for this is that they can also benefit from internal heat flows from adjacent apartments, so from their neighbors basically. But there's other explanations as well. So for example, people ventilate very differently. Again, not only between households, but also within households. So living rooms, most people open windows less than an hour a day, which seems reasonable. In other rooms, like in bedrooms, they open the windows much longer, and which is also part of how they open windows. For example, in bedrooms and other rooms, they tilt windows much more, whereas in living rooms, more people rely on shock ventilation. And then there's other variables. I also have to pick two here. For example, rooms are opened very differently between, and this can be a problem if there's unheated rooms and highly ventilated rooms like kitchens, where the doors are mostly opened, and the doors are also open in living rooms, which are highly heated. Or what do people do if they feel too warm, which happens also in winter, that they open windows. And what we see from this basically that occupants have heterogeneous comfort preferences depending on room and activity. They keep windows tilted for very long times. They keep doors open for convenience and aesthetic reasons. That means, for example, for visual comfort, they keep doors open, and they expect fast feedback from heating systems, for example, in bathrooms. So when they turn it up, they expect it to get warm quickly. And households with lower sensitivity to moderate temperatures or cool temperatures, they can benefit from their neighbors' heating. And this can have impacts on energy performance gaps, but which is more interesting, this also shows that energy consuming behavior is probably rather habitual and routinely, not planned and rational, because most people don't have all these factors in mind. They rather react spontaneously to achieve thermal comfort. So, and the interaction of different comfort preferences within multi-apartment buildings and internal heat flows make monetary incentives and information hard for people to deal with this. But what is more important is that most of these patterns, they might be aggravated actually in highly insulated buildings, because highly insulated, the more you insulate a building, the higher the temperatures. So research shows this again and again. And you also see more homogeneous temperatures in highly insulated buildings. So something which people might actually not want. You also see then the high ventilation rates there, and this might actually make the energy performance gap a permanent thing, which is why we should think about other measures in the existing building stock. So I agree there with Giorgia, for example. And this is why we apply smart heating regulation systems, which could address some of these problems. I don't want to get in detail here now because I'm already over time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon. The intention on understanding the interaction between the building occupants and the building technologies, and more particularly about how they impact the heating energy consumption within the buildings is quite impressive. Thank you. Yes, we did not introduce you before. Sorry for that.
No worries.
Simon received his master's degree in sociology and economics from the LMU Munich in 2016. After a 2-year employment as a project supervisor in energy management consulting, he has been since 2018 working as a research assistant for the Institute of Sociology. In the research project FCOM, energy efficient residential comfort, user-oriented development of an automated system for the control of space heating. He is working in close cooperation with engineers and computer scientists to analyze human technology interactions and their effects on energy consumption. Now, it quite seems apt now, looking into your presentation, there are too many practicalities and calculative research results that you have been showcasing. Thank you once again. Yes, the audience, there are some really interesting topics we have in this session. So I'm sure you might you are keen to know more about these topics. So do keep posting questions using your chat window. We will now see another presentation on gap analysis. We have seen residential, some historic buildings, some more specific apartment buildings, and now we move on to the commercial sector. We would invite Matt to present his topic on a gap analysis of the literature on energy savings behavior in the commercial sector. Matt is an energy analyst in Orlando, Florida. He is a research associate with Sea Changed Institute. He is seeking to utilize behavioral insights to optimize utility programs and the use of energy. He also works as an independent energy consultant in energy policy, markets, and technology. He operates a blog and consultancy called Chester Energy and Policy, where he works to research and share news, insights, and advice in the fields of energy policy, energy technology, and more. He studied mechanical engineering, civil engineering, and science and technology policy at the University of Virginia. Out of curiosity, I actually did visit his blog, and yes, there are some really good latest interesting reads. The recent post about the energy insights on Super Bowl game was quite absorbing. Matt, the floor is yours.
So good morning, everybody. Like you said, my name is Matt Chester, and I'm here with the Sea Change Institute, and today I'll be presenting the findings to a study we completed called a gap analysis of the literature of energy-saving behaviors in the commercial sector. So before we dive in, the overall mission that we're always looking to deliver is well captured by this quote. We believe the role of research is not only to better understand the world, but also to improve it. In that way, we're always looking for ways to tap into academic study to improve the processes of using and consuming and thinking about everything, including energy. So here you'll see just a few of our clients and partners who have embraced that message with us. And I'll be presenting our team's findings today, but I did also want to recognize the other members of our team who made this possible, Drs. Beth Carlin and C. Rotman. And if you want a full copy of our study at the end of this, please feel free to reach out to Beth. So going back to our partners who dive into the science with us, this gap analysis was initiated thanks to an engagement we had with BC Hydro and Fortis BC. Those are two utilities out of Canada. As a part of this project, they asked our team of behavioral scientists and energy researchers to look deeper into the opportunities that existed specifically in the commercial energy efficiency space. We had previously helped them build up an extensive library of actions, tips, and behaviors for the residential space to encourage those consumers to engage with and create energy efficiency. And they were curious if one could be done for the commercial sector as well. So we were to start with an assessment of the needs and opportunities of the commercial energy efficiency space, which would then feed into, down the road, a similar tip library to be used by the utility program, by their commercial energy managers to identify new opportunities for energy and cost savings. So the presentation today, I'm summarizing the results of that assessment of the commercial energy efficiency space. So being the researchers and academics we are, we didn't want to jump right into advising these utilities in what they can or should do without investigating some of these compelling academic questions. Why exactly was it that resources and studies were promoting commercial energy efficient behaviors were less prevalent than the very, very common ones you could find for residential energy efficiency, and what would be needed to fix that? So to identify the perceived shortcomings that we had hypothesized about, the logical first step, of course, was to make sure we were right about that lack of information, that it wasn't just anecdotal. So we performed a comprehensive scrub of literature, including academic, customer-facing, utility-based, and really anything else we can get our hands on to determine what was the state of this literature of commercial energy efficiency behaviors today. We focus on primary and secondary literature on commercial energy savings behaviors from the past 15 years. We tapped into basic keyword searches, the common way any of these stakeholders in the commercial space might, using backward and forward search of academic sources and references, and we even tapped into our personal contacts of experts studying these type of questions in our field. All told, we identified and cataloged and reviewed nearly 100 different papers broken down into the various commercial subsectors that you see in this table. And here you can see a representative screenshot of the structure of the tip library we started to pull out based on these resources. We cataloged what behavior suggestions were recommended and categorized them based on stuff like fuel source, renter behavior versus owner behavior, subsector, and much more. You're not supposed to be able to read this. This is kind of just showing the scale of it. And on the next slide, I can zoom in and even smaller, just again to give you a taste of the framework that we were building upon and working towards. So when we did this deep dive, we came away with 3 main conclusions and key discoveries. Broadly speaking, the survey of literature found that, 1, there was an overgeneralization of the commercial building sector in terms of what types of buildings were discussed and what those buildings were assumed to be used for. 2, specifically office buildings, the typical office worker building was too often considered to be kind of the default commercial building and served as a proxy to represent the entire commercial sector, which is an extremely diverse sector. So it was kind of painting that with way too broad of a brush. And then lastly, for the behavior types that were focused upon in this literature, the actions suggested were pretty limited to specifically purchasing and upgrading equipment, buying more energy efficiency equipment, and not really suggesting any sort of how people's behaviors or interactions with that equipment should be changed. So on that first point of overgeneralizing the commercial building sector, we found that while the residential sector could be reasonably addressed holistically with a somewhat broad brush, the commercial sector is made up of too many unique types of buildings and business uses for such a one-size-fits-all strategy to be at all effective. But that's how commercial energy savings literature was treating the sector. Addressing each unique commercial subsector requires more investment, but without it, there's glaring gaps in the literature today. The next point was the overrepresentation of research on office buildings. When the literature did specify which type of commercial building it was handling, it by and large tended to focus on the traditional office setting. As this graph shows, and this is focused on US specific data, but there's a wide variety in what the energy profiles are of different types of buildings within the commercial sector. And where there was a smaller set of literature that we found that did address energy savings in hospitals, education, or food service, for example, the prevalence of that literature was significantly less. The usefulness of the recommendations were more dubious, more questionable, and there were still other parts of the commercial industry left completely unexamined. So again, while the office building energy use is certainly critical, it is not the only aspect of the commercial sector. And in fact, in the past year, with COVID-19 bringing more of the workforce remote, we're already seeing a changing of what we assumed about office energy use anyway, making these conclusions even more difficult. And lastly, like I said, the behaviors that were examined when we could find relevant commercial literature, it focused mainly on the purchase of technology, but not specific behaviors to interact with that technology. In our tip library, we started to identify a host of different behaviors other than investment in equipment, including curtailing that equipment, upgrading or using more intelligent software to go along with it, education for the building occupants, and processes put in place for the building operators to follow. There's a lot of substance left to examine here beyond simply saying you should buy more efficient equipment and moving beyond those type of really surface level opportunities. So taking these shortcomings all together, we found our gap analysis identified some important opportunities. There's low-hanging fruit being missed. The resources, both in terms of time and money, that are being poured into commercial energy efficiency are largely being wasted without a more careful examination. And on the academic and research level, the investigations on where this can all be improved remains out of the spotlight, and unfortunately, it's underfunded. So coming away from this research, the main takeaway was to realize that the significant energy savings potential of the commercial sector and the related energy saving behaviors, we need more research there. And in that research, rather than continuing to focus on the overall commercial sector, we recommend significant investment in what we're calling small science, numerous smaller and more focused studies on individual subsectors and or energy saving behaviors within the commercial realm. Unfortunately, a one-size-fits-all approach will continue to neglect potential energy savings behaviors that are unique to hospitals, to grocery stores, to restaurants, to dry cleaners, and to the dozens or even hundreds of other unique commercial building uses in the world that are being left on the table. So lastly, we encourage more funders to support this work and more researchers to undertake it because, as we all know, our planet is depending on it. So that's all I have to you today. Thanks again for listening. And like I mentioned at the beginning, if you want to learn more, you want to see our full report, please reach out to my colleague, Beth Carlin, at the email address you see on the screen. Thank you, and happy to address any comments or questions.
Thank you, Matt. The presentation once again emphasizes on how one-size-fits-all approach unfortunately diverts us from tapping into the true potential energy-saving behavior opportunities. We do move on to our next speaker now, Rabab. She will be presenting on the topic reducing energy consumption in a tertiary building using nudges. Rabab, your floor is yours.
Well, hello everybody. I'm so glad to present my research work concerning energy savings in a tertiary building using nudges. So we will start with the general context of this study, then present some of the tools we'll use that are technological and behavioral, and some of the results we have. So as a general context, we have the sector of building, which is a very consuming sector with 46% of the final energy, the total final energy consumption. In order to improve the energy efficiency of buildings, we can act on the building itself through the performance of the envelope, the insulation, efficiency solutions that are like monitoring, regulation, and control, and also using efficient equipment. However, we can see that there is a performance that Simon clearly described before, and where the occupant's behavior and the indoor comfort play a crucial role in influencing the real energy consumption. So the technological solutions alone are not enough, and we need to combine them with the behavioral approach in order to understand occupant behavior, try to predict real energy consumptions, and change these behaviors and evaluate the impact of this change. So engineers, in order to energy consumption, they use dynamic thermal simulations that take into consideration buildings' inertia, the building units, but also occupants' behavior must be taken into consideration in these dynamic thermal simulations. In order to have to reduce this gap between predicted consumption ones, we can either improve the occupant behavior models that are integrated in the simulation tools, or educate occupants so they have common behavior virtuous and that can avoid huge consumptions later. So how can we change this behavior without restriction occupants and how can energy reductions? So for changing occupant behavior, we present the concept of nudge, which is a behavior economics concept that is based on a low-cost solution that cognitive biases in order to make incentive actions and make people choose the wished decision without any financial incentives or order. Our methodology is to use nudge in through smart meters, collect data concern the behavior change in the building, and integrate this information in the thermodynamic simulation in order to quantify the impact of using nudges in reducing energy consumption in buildings. So the methodology is based, first of all, on a survey through a questionnaire where we have to understand the behavior of occupants in the building and define the behaviors that must be changed in order to reduce energy consumption, but also to define occupants' profiles. To define these profiles, we have to understand the interaction with the building of occupants, and also to understand the importance of environmental questions for the concerned occupants, but also their perception of conditions and other incentives in order to know which nudge use with them. We also collect data through, as I said, smart meters, data concerning door opening, window opening, set points of temperature, occupancy, and energy consumption. All this information will be used in order to do a simulation and quantify the impact of using nudge in reducing energy consumption in the studied building. So for the used nudge, we have 4 types of nudge that are used. The first one is the peer-to-peer comparison, which appeals to the fact that people can do more effort when they are in a competition situation. The feedback, which gives feedback to occupants about their energy use and use tailored messaging in order to encourage them. Moral appeal, which is pictures or messages that show the impact of global warming on the planet. And finally, social reviews, which define the right behaviors to adopt and that all people, the majority adopt, so we have. So the choice of which nudge to use depends on the profiles of people through the survey, and for each type of profile, there is a nudge that may have more impact. So study, we choose an office building, which is in Nice, in France, with 50 occupants. It's a building with 3 floors, 1 meeting room, 1 kitchen, and 34 offices. Why did we choose this building? First of all, because when we talk about tertiary building, we don't have financial incentive, and people don't pay the bill, so we can see more clearly the impact of the used nudge. And secondly, because this office building equipped with meters that may help us collect the data. So concerning the behavior change we choose to apply in this building, just as a remark, normally we wanted to launch the experimentation in the building, but since with the actual situation of the COVID-19, people are working from home, so we couldn't experimentation. However, we simulated the impact all occupants' behavior in the building through the simulation to see the impact of a total responding to the nudge in. We observed the occupants' behavior and choose the behaviors that may lead to huge consumptions. Then try to make 3 levels of changing occupants' behavior concerning heating, cooling, lighting, and using devices, such as changing the set point temperature or turning off heating while windows are open, and other behavior change. And as a result, we have found out that if all occupants respond to the nudge in the studied build, we can 50% of energy savings concerning heating in the building, 45% of savings, and the total saving of 27% for all the systems. Now we may ask ourselves, what's the case? What are the novel respond to the nudge? For this, we simulated the case where only South offices respond positively and have this behavior. We can have 10% of energy in the building. And in the case of the North offices, 8.5% of occupants of energy reduced in the building. So the location of the offices in the building has of the offices in the which occupants we may apply the best. As a perspective to this work, we can integrate more accurate models of occupants' behavior in the simulation in order to have more accurate results concerning the impact of nudge. And as I said, occupants patterns may help us choose which nudge to apply to which occupant, and so put a link between occupants profiles, nudges, and energy reductions in the building. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Rabab. There was a bit of internet connectivity issues, I believe, but yes, nevertheless, to all the audience and the speakers here, the recording will be available again for your reference on the website after the conference. So yes, but in case you do need or do have these questions or queries regarding the presentations, please feel free to shoot some questions here. We have quite a good time to discuss about Q&A session. Yes, again, I did not introduce Rabab earlier. She is an electrical engineer and PhD at Mainz Paris Tech, Applied Mathematics Center. She works on the impact of using nudges in reducing energy consumption in residential and tertiary buildings by combining a behavioral and technical approach. I think the presentation was had an interesting approach on focusing on nudges backed by a case study. And I believe looking into the abstract actually earlier, you have plans to carry out this work ahead in automation of the process of generating nudges. So yeah, all the best.
Yeah.
So we move on to the next speaker, Kurt. Kurt will be presenting on the topic location efficiency and home location choice behavior. So yes, request all the audience actually to hold on to this session. This topic is about North American case study on energy efficiency and housing choice. So yes, it gets interesting as it was until now. So Kurt, to introduce Kurt, he's currently a lecturer and researcher in human geography and planning with professional experience in environmental program management and sustainable behavior change. Research interests include energy use behavior change, energy use and built environment, and how geography influences sustainable behaviors and opinions. So yes, Kurt, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rahul. Can you see the slides?
Yes.
Great. So yeah, I'll be talking about location efficiency and home location choice behavior today. Like Rahul said, it is a North American case study, so keep that in mind. Great to see that we had some other representation earlier on in the session from Matt. And this was research done at the University of Alberta in Edmonton, Canada. So what is location efficiency? That's a great question. We kind of have an intuitive idea when we hear the two words. We can, understand what efficiency is, what geographic location is. We come up with an idea in our heads. For the purposes of this presentation, location efficient communities are considered dense and vibrant with walkable streets, active transportation, access to transport, proximity to jobs, mixed land uses, concentrations of retail and services. And really the idea, you saw it in the last presentation, we have transportation and we have household energy use as separate pies in the graph 99% of the time. Location efficiency brings those together because when we make housing decisions and decide where we're going to live, energy use from transportation and other types of energy use come into play a lot. So what it isn't, this slide talks about a single family detached home. Two identical homes were modeled, one in the suburbs, one in a location efficient place, and the one in the suburbs used up to 38% more energy than the one in a location efficient place. So what it isn't is suburban greenfield development. And we all know what this is, urban sprawl. North America, it's continuing, and I have recently relocated to the UK, and it's very continuing here as well, surprisingly to me. Studies show that up to 81% of homebuyers surveyed would rather live in a more location efficient home. There's a lot of barriers to that, but it is true that they are interested in living in more location efficient homes, but there are financial barriers really is the main one to that happening. That's a different study. So there are a lot of costs involved in location inefficient living. Health costs that we really know a lot about. We've looked at this for years. Heart disease, diabetes rates go up in location inefficient places with long commutes. Time costs. Time is really one of our biggest resources that we all want more of nowadays. So that's a big one. Environmental costs, which might change with the introduction and adoption of EVs, but traffic and congestion will still be issues. There are also a lot of taxpayer costs. So municipalities can't really recoup in North America anyway the costs that they expend to hook these new neighborhoods up to the infrastructure. So plumbing, water, resources that need to be out in these places. They have a tough time getting these costs back because these are primarily residential areas. Residents then are still overwhelmingly choosing housing in traditional suburban development. They not only do they say they would like to live in more location efficient places, but the model that we have, and maybe path dependency is having a problem there as well, or having an influence there as well. The model we still have, the predominant model, is adding these neighborhoods on the edge in suburban greenfield areas. You can see this map of the city of Edmonton. The red and orange areas are the most growing because this is where we have the room, especially in North America, to put these new homes. The case study was done in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. It's about 1.4 million people. It's the most northern city in North America above 1 million. The majority of the city developed alongside the automobile, which was unfortunate for us. European cities and UK cities, and even cities on the east coast of North America developed a lot of their built environment before the adoption of the automobile. So they have these great sort of vibrant areas, but most of the cities did not in North America. So we grew up alongside the automobile, and that really had an influence on how these cities grew. Most of the year it looks like this, and you may laugh, but this was actually not this picture, but this happened just a few days ago in Edmonton. So I experienced a German word, Schadenfreude, which is the discomfort of others, or enjoyment in the discomfort of others, because I was in England and didn't have to deal with this. But this also has an influence on our home energy use. So our homes are very well insulated because otherwise we would be in risk of death if not. But we do have very large homes. The rest of the year, it looks like this most of the time. It also has the highest automobile suburb and exurban growth in Canada, with this study by a geographer named Gordon at Queen's University in Canada. And we have the largest percentage of suburban residents, according to this criteria, in Canada at over 86%, which isn't a great thing to lead in. Most of the houses that I looked at in this study, so this was part of a bigger research project into location efficiency. So we looked at single detached, semi-detached row houses and duplexes. The majority of housing in Edmonton is single detached. We have a lot of room, so we have a lot of single detached houses with yards and things of that nature. The average home size in Canada is 2,300 square feet. It's a little bigger in America. That's about 213 square meters, and that's without the ubiquitous basement that can add another percentage onto that as well. These are just some pictures of some of the housing types in Edmonton. We do have some older types in the bottom left and bottom right, but the majority are since probably 1950, because we do build out of wood and these houses don't tend to last as long. This study looked at semi-structured qualitative interviews. So we looked at 38 households, 2 to 3 hours each, and we asked them about location efficiency and their home location choice and their behavior. The results that came out of this, they did talk about commuting transportation, which dealt with previous commuting experiences, and we thought that was quite interesting because they talked about either good or bad past experiences and how those affected their housing choice behavior later on in life. So lots of people talked about how they had a very bad commuting experience, either going to school or university, or maybe one of their first jobs. They had a long drive and they did not want to recreate that, and they made it a barrier in their head or a line in their head that they would not cross, which was interesting. Some also had good commuting experiences when they were in these younger life situations. They lived near a campus, or they took transit that was very easy. They walk or bike to work, and they wanted to recreate that also. One of the biggest ones was misinterpretation of transportation costs, because people in North America, obviously we have lower fuel prices. In Canada right now, where I'm from in Alberta, it's about half what it is in the UK. So they claim that they did not budget these costs into their long-term budgets when choosing a home location. That might seem odd to people here, but people just didn't think about it because of the costs. The odd part about that is that in research, it shows that when you do add that up over 10 to 15 years, it does add up to be quite considerable, especially when you add in the time and the health costs that we talked about earlier. Also, they had past experiences with home attributes. So the ideal, what we call infill in Edmonton, is when you knock down an existing home in the inner sort of urban core and you put up maybe 2 or 3 or 4 townhouses or duplexes, things that have attached walls. People do tend to have an aversion to living in some of these houses because they have this past experience that told them, they could smell the food of their neighbor, or they could hear a lot of noise. So they were basing this on sort of things done maybe in the 1980s or early 90s that maybe have changed. And that brings us to the conclusions. So that one that we just talked about, maybe we could have some behavioral implications if we had advertising, if we had ways in which we could convince people that these areas were, or these homes were soundproof. You wouldn't have to worry about dealing with your neighbor or hearing anything that was going on. That might help the uptake of these types of denser places to live. Also, the energy efficiency of these places is obviously a lot better, so we could promote that. You're saving energy by sharing a wall. A lot of municipalities and developers tend to be stuck in this single-family residential model. There are a lot of other options. There's smaller cottages, there's brownstones, there's a lot of innovative things being done in other municipalities that developers don't seem to be doing. And I think this needs to be promoted as well, especially because the 81% of people would rather live in a more location-efficient place. And also evidence for novel education and awareness programs that we can really address this misperception of transportation costs. That really needs to be addressed. We really need to make these costs more visible. And we can't assume that people are performing accurate travel cost calculations. Just like with all the other research, we know that we're not perfect, rational, economic computers. We need to actually address this, I think. Location efficiency then, I think, needs to be a necessary step in the home location choice process. So thanks very much to the rest of the panel, and thanks very much, Rahul.
Thank you, Kurt. This is something which we do experience, which is quite apt in our day-to-day life also. I think this is something I can also relate to a certain extent here in Copenhagen about location efficiency. There are different factors that play an important role in deciding the behavioral aspects of the energy efficiency also. So yes, this brings us to an end of a captivating session, exploring different approaches, tackling behavior towards energy efficiency. Audience are encouraged to post their questions, use the chat option, send the questions to the moderators. Please do mention the speaker's name to whom your question is directed to. I will give about 30 seconds time, and then we will start with the Q&A. So yes, I hope all the speakers are here with us, and once again, thank you all the speakers and the audience for a lively session here. So we would now moving on to the Q&A session. So yes, there were a lot of questions that were being posted, and yeah. We would see not all questions can be answered as of now, depending on the time availability. But yes, we will see if there is enough time available. Then yes, we can squeeze in some more questions. But yes, you do write to us if there are any further questions that needs to be addressed. The first question I would be 1 second. I have to yes. For the first speaker, Annika, these were the 2 questions that were posted to you. I did not change anything. It was as being posted by the audience. it's the first one says cool research. Don't you think that these targeted interventions may polarize the opinion of individuals? What is? I mean, you can answer the question.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I saw that in the chat, and I thought a little bit about that, especially what Maria means about the polarization. But I think what we did is that we not give different information to the people, but it's just the way we framed them to just get there where they are standing. So if they are more environmentally oriented, then we framed it a little bit more in that direction. But then in the end, they got the same information, but it was just the way we framed it in terms of these recommendations that were that were differently framed. Yeah, and then the second one is, as I said, I think it's difficult to implement that in real world settings, and so we really had to transfer it to a manageable, pragmatic approach, and maybe it's not feasible to do the tailoring to each all of these steps, and of course you need some more practice on doing that, and then more information and recommendations for business partners, for example, to implement that. Yeah, I hope that answered your question.
The next question, Annika, how can tailoring segmentation approaches be implemented in real world settings?
So sorry, I did just answer that in my last answer. Yeah, I think it's quite challenging, and I think you need best practice cases and then give clear guidelines for business partners to transfer to implement that.
There's another question before moving on to the next speaker. Just recently received to you, Annika. Can you say something again on how people get the intervention and how success is measured?
Yeah. So they, as soon as they were in our sample, we also had a control group. They got a smart meter, and they had this app that they downloaded. And some of these consumers were also, so we had residential and commercial buildings. And some of the consumers, for example, in the residential buildings, got plugged in to see really at the consumption of cooking, for example, or for entertainment. So some of these devices were coupled with a smart plug, so we could measure that. And then they got recommendations based on certain trigger points. Some were more frequent than for others. And then they got the weekly notifications where they got some information about their own consumption compared to others. And for those who were really fully plugged with the devices, there was the possibility to also do the automation control. So these were the kind of main interventions we did. And we did not measure the success fully as the data are not here, but we got so we have the data of the consumption through the whole lifetime, through the whole project time. So we can measure that change compared to the control group. Yeah.
Thank you, Annika. We will move on to the next. Yes. Giorgia. First question is, what are the most significant potentiality and the most significant weaknesses of the Biosphere methodology?
So the most significant potentiality, I think, is that the implementation is almost zero costly, and also what we see in historic buildings is that normally all the other intervention that you want to do, like insulation or substitution of windows, would require a long process of authorization from the authorities protecting the heritage, at least in Italy, but I think in the large majority of countries. And the most significant weakness is that acting with the, and in, let's say, having to do with the people, you need that they are actually engaged. So it's not easy to keep the dialogue alive with the occupants and the building administrations, especially because, at least in the methodology, there is a long part which is dedicated to the analysis of how the building is at the moment, so energy consumption, etc., etc. So the actual results from the strategies will appear after more than 1 year from the start of the methodology. So it's not easy to stay in warm contact with the building administrators, and also let's say engage the technicians, which usually act as they always have, and maybe they don't want to change what they have always done.
Quite a task, common task for all the people who are in the energy sector. I mean, the challenge is to ask someone to change from their previous practices to a better practice. But yes, so the next question: how did you assess behavioral change, and which were the most interesting results?
Yeah, behavioral change was actually was assessed by a post-intervention questionnaire, and we did it in 2 ways. So there was a direct assessment. So we directly asked to people if they changed their behavior towards a series of interfaces, so like light switches or Windows control, etc. And also indirectly, so repeating some questions that we did in the first phase, in the first questionnaire, and then comparing the results afterwards. And the interesting thing was that people were quite aware of their change in behavior, and also the let's say the direct assessment and the indirect one were very coherent. So there was almost always a direct relation between, let's say, the indirect assessment and the direct one. So I think that it's interesting. And I think that this was possible because a lot of the communication means were addressed to really explain to people the impact of their actions within the environment.
Thank you, Giorgia. I'll move on to the next speaker. Simon, you have 2 questions. The first one, they are interested in the window opening. I mean, the participant was interested in the window opening behavior that you have addressed. What kind of ventilation do these buildings have? And I think the next one is supporting, in continuation with the previous question, do they have a constant mechanical ventilation, or do they only rely on the window opening for the air exchange?
It's old buildings. They don't have any mechanical ventilation. So it's just natural ventilation by occupants, which is usual for these buildings. I mean, for new buildings, for new very energy efficient buildings, they're basically so sealed and insulated that you need mechanical ventilation. But you see there also that people open windows a lot, and actually more than would be needed from the air exchange rate provided by the system. So there seems to be that people open windows for a lot of reasons, actually. So yeah.
Thank you. The next questions for Matt. The first one, What are the examples of some of the behaviors that apply to one area of the commercial sector but not others?
Yeah, so it all depends on, the most energy intensive applications in the building type. There in hospitals, there are medical equipment types that use all sorts of energy that are obviously relevant there, but not elsewhere. In office buildings, you might be able to turn off lights or eliminate HVAC energy use when it's not needed. But in hotels, you're not going to want to ever make the common areas of the hotel feel less inviting by doing the same. And then even within a subsector, the differences can be great. A fine dining restaurant may be more readily able to time when they turn on and off cooking equipment in a way that a fast food restaurant that needs to be constantly ready isn't able to. So it's really about identifying, one, the high energy uses in the commercial building and business type, and then two, establishing from there what parameters you can or can't bend on for that energy use, and then really putting those together to dive in.
You rightly pointed out, and most of the times I do come across situations where, though it is highly energy intensive, there are certain places, situations where they do not want to compromise upon the ambience with respect to lighting or the comforts or the luxury to show off and all. So, it makes sense. Who are the actors looking to play a role in the advancement of commercial efficiency behavior? Where is there not enough engagement? Why? I think why?
Yeah. So that's kind of one of the natural follow-up questions to the study that we did that, this is leading to. But, it's one of the main challenges. You have landlords and occupants with different motivating factors. You have, occupants who might impact energy use in, like I said, in hotels where they're going to crank up their AC. So it's harder to capture their efficiency behaviors. You have the utilities who want to help reduce energy use, especially during peak demand times, but commercial opportunities are much less explored in that area than the residential and industrial demand management side. So everyone who buys and sells energy, uses it, benefits from its use, they all have different incentives, different levers can be pulled to incentivize them, and that's what makes this area particularly challenging. Is there's not just one group you're going after; it's a whole swath of them. So, at the residential level, you're looking at the person paying the utility bill, and then maybe the rest of his or her family, who they can usually get onto the same page to work together to reduce energy use. But it's not nearly as simple in the commercial space. So engaging each of these stakeholders kind of uniquely, tapping into their individual motivating factors, it's something that you can't overlook, and more of that engagement definitely is needed. And I think largely that engagement, once on the research side we kind of dive into it and see where behaviors can be tweaked a little bit, then we need to move to the utility side, who really serves as we call the trusted energy advisor for them to try to implement those.
Thank you, Matt.
Mm-hmm.
The next question to Rabab. How did you define behaviors to change and the interventions to integrate?
Sorry, can you repeat? I can't see the question.
Okay, the screen is not visible to you. That's okay. I'll repeat
Hello?
the question. Hello, can you?
Yeah,
am I audible?
because I cannot see it on the.
Okay, sure. So the question is, how did you define behaviors to change and the interventions to integrate?
Yeah, so for the behaviors to change, it's based on the survey, on the questionnaire. So we can know what are the behaviors that lead to huge energy consumptions, and also through observation of occupants' behavior. And then depending on this, and depending on the profiles that are built based on the survey, we can choose which nudge suits better to the profile.
I'm assuming that the second question also was slightly addressed, but you can have a look into it again. how did you choose the nudges to use, and in which way are they presented to the occupants?
Yeah, so as I said, they are chosen through the occupants' profiles, and for the presentations, it's also based on which have more impact on the occupants, like pictures or messages or tailored messages or emails. So depending on the profiles, we can determine which type of communication tool we can use to present the different nudges.
Thank you. I'll move on to the next.
Thank you.
Kurt, the first question is, are there any tools or resources that people can utilize to aid in their home location decision calculation?
Yeah, so in America, in the US, there's something called the H&T Affordability Index, which is a very handy map that you can put the address of the home you're thinking about moving to, and it will give you sort of an evaluation of the costs that will go along with choosing that location, which is very, very handy. We don't have that in Canada. I'm not sure if they have that in the UK. But it's kind of something like the walk score. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it rates your neighborhood based on how a walkable or active transportation ease is available in that neighborhood. So yeah, it'd be great if we'd have more tools like this. I think it would help with the education part as well.
Good. So moving on to the next question, quite prevailing these times, I think. Suitable for the current times. Do you think COVID will change the issues involved with commuting to work, with more people working from home?
Yes, I think it has already, and I think we've seen. I mean, there's been lots of presentations that have talked about it as well. I think there's some opportunities though that it can present, and that would be that, you know, these empty office buildings, maybe these can be at some point converted to more residential places. So you'd have instant location efficient housing. I mean, not instant, you'd have to do the converting, but some options there. And then I think people who live in these new suburban greenfield developments that traditionally where I'm from don't come with a lot of services. So they still have to drive. Even though they're at home most of the day, they still have to go drop their kids off. They have to go to the grocery store. They can't walk or bike to do any of these things. So maybe it would make people more, maybe I'm cautiously optimistic that people will be more cognizant of this, and maybe that will push these new developments to kind of build these areas out with these sort of services and businesses included. Yeah.
So yes, thank you, Kurt. We are done with the questions. I mean, yeah, we do have a few more questions, but I do not want to hold on to you all. The scheduled coffee break was from 2:30 to 3. I have stolen minutes of your time. So yeah, I think we can call an end to this session. Thank you all for participating in this session, and it was quite interesting to have quite a variety of approach. Studies being presented, and we would be doing a lot of more research into these areas, I believe. So yeah, all the best for that. Thank you.